Hey kids! Sorry to meet this way. Unexpectedly, our schedule is changing, but today's lesson really requires a little bit of mama bearing. So I'm going to record what I would have said to you guys, and you guys can listen to it either before or after you're done reading the article. So today's article is called The Horror by Neil deGrasse Tyson. There are a few hard copies available. The printer was going super slow, and we wound up having to get it fixed, so sorry. The Horror. Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you are not familiar with him, is an astrophysicist. He's a super smart science guy. His brain is amazing because he is one of those people who can look at something and understand the math of it. Neil deGrasse Tyson could stand in this room and tell us the distance and how far it is and what the approximate square footage is, and he could just do that just by existing. So Neil deGrasse Tyson's brain is very logos. As we were talking about Pathos, Ethos, and logos, some people's brains are sort of, chaotic flower spaces. I mean, that's my brain. My brain is artsy, and my brain looks like a crazy New York museum all the time. And Neil deGrasse Tyson's brain is organized, and it's very linear, and it's very mathematic. So he's a very logical person. I give you that as background because he's writing something nonfiction, and he didn't intend for it to have a purpose really except documentation. Neil deGrasse Tyson sat down the day of 9/11 at the end of the day, and he writes this email. This existed in its first form as an email that he sent to his colleagues. So Neil deGrasse Tyson just wanted to document what he lived through because he understood it to be significant, and he understood that documenting it in the moment was going to be important and needed to be done. Because the further you get away from an incident, the harder it is to remember some of the details. In particular, because he has such a mathematical brain, Neil deGrasse Tyson's able to document the certain things that went on. He was also paying attention to time. He's able to provide you in this article exact timestamps about what happens, when it happens, how it happens, the function of what he saw. So importantly, I'm looking at the article, he lived in Lower Manhattan when it happened. So he lived within eyeshot of the buildings. His daughter's kindergarten was 3 blocks from the World Trade Center, and their morning lineup happened in a yard in front of the school that had a complete view of the World Trade Center. So, he was really right there. He had a daughter in kindergarten, and he had a younger son. So he had 2 small children, and he discusses what it's like to see that happen. He goes in a linear order when he is telling you the story. So he starts first by saying, my entire family is safe. He knows he has to get that off of his chest. Then he immediately goes back to the morning and starts going point by point by point. Pay attention to 2 things with this article. The subject itself is inherently pathos-driven. This is an emotional event. It is horrific. It is tragic. People have strong emotional responses to it, especially if they were alive when it happened. You guys have heard about it your whole entire lives, and you weren't there because you weren't even born yet. But the people who saw it have this very visceral reaction to it. That is pathos on its own, without prompting, without prodding, without doing anything additional. DeGrasse Tyson tempers the pathos. He lightens it, he lessens it, he reins it in. And he does this by using a lot of logos. So logos is the most unemotional of the 3. Because credibility can be based on your sort of emotional reaction to an author. Pathos and ethos can incite emotion in you. Logos really isn't meant to do that. Sometimes it's an accidental component. Like if I gave you a horrific statistic, you might be like, oh my God. But Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about one of the most intensely emotional times of his entire life, and he keeps it together for the most part. When you are reading this, or if you've already read it, you should look carefully at how he uses listing. Listing's a literary device, so one of those things, how does logos work? The listing. The timestamps. Timestamps are also a device. He uses a lot of hard fact, like I'm looking at number 3. A fiery explosion burst forth from a corner of WTC2 about 2/3 of the way up, perhaps the 60th floor. So he's able to do the math on 2/3 up the building is probably the 60th floor. A little later on in the same thing, he says, from my vantage point, I could not see the plane that caused it, which hit 180 degrees on the other side of the building. So on the complete opposite side. Choosing to say it that way, choosing to say it hits on 180 degrees, every time he hits you with numbers, you kind of come out of the emotion a little bit because numbers are colder. They're less emotional. So he's giving you these horrific visuals. The building is exploding. There's heat and fire. There was the acoustic shockwave that rattles windows. He knew it was going to fall. Sorry. He knew the building was going to fall. He says he sees it from like how the impact was. He was like, this is going to fall. And when it does fall, he goes, everybody within a 2-block radius is probably covered in ash, but everyone who was a first responder is dead. And he just knows this because he understands the physics of it. And the physics of it are very important there. As he's going through the article, he acknowledges emotion. He goes, upsetting enough, but then. Upsetting enough, but then. He acknowledges that the things he's talking about are horrific, but he keeps his cool. I want you guys to really see, appreciate, and focus on how he manages to keep his cool. This should be a discussion point between you guys. You should be really looking at the phrases. It should be like a study, like a bug under like glass. How on earth do you talk about 2 giant buildings, 2 skyscrapers in the sky, in the building that you live in, that your children live in, that you can see from your house? How do you discuss planes going into them and then falling to the ground, killing people, covering the city in ash, having to wrap your infant up with like a wet rag around their face so they don't breathe in the smoke, having to put everything in your backpack and go to the train station and hope for a train, not really knowing where your spouse is. 2001, people didn't really carry cell phones. Like you guys are used to, in an emergency situation, you can get in touch with people. There weren't a lot of people carrying around cell phones. That was still beeper time, and like, it's a different way of experiencing fear and terror. Like he was able to get his daughter, he was able to get his son, he was trying to find his wife, and he manages to deliver this information accurately, acknowledging the scope of the impact. But maintaining a calm tone. If you were to read this out loud, you wouldn't get like, oh my God, the buildings. You would keep it really steady because he keeps it steady. You guys should be looking at how he manages to pull that trick off because it is intensely hard. It is easy in a case like this with a subject already overwhelmingly emotional to accidentally give in to all of that emotion and just make that the showpiece of the writing. How do you keep it tempered? How do you rein it in? We're going to look at another example of that next class. So it's a little bit of the same. You have the article, partially in hard copy and online. The hard copy one, for some reason, I don't know if you can see, it's super small. And I usually try to make it big for you guys, but it just, the copy machine and I had a disagreement, and I don't know how to make it agree with me. So you can use the hard copy, but the online one's pretty easier. I indicated to you colors to use in the highlighting. You are obviously welcome to customize your color choices. I apologize for missing you guys. We're going to go over some of the same material next class. I really appreciate your patience, and I am grading all of your essays. You should see updates If you have any missing assignments that I haven't updated, I'm going to put a Google form for you to fill out. And I'm really sorry for missing you guys, but I should see you next time. Please behave.